Good evening. My name is Janelle Lusick, and on behalf of Musique Royale, welcome to this evening's concert featuring Helios Vocal Ensemble performing at the Highland Village Museum. The Highland Village Museum is unique in that it's the only living history museum in North America that's dedicated to preserving Gaelic language and culture. And it's really something to come to this museum and hear the tour guides chatting about in the Gaelic language, and they're so welcoming every time we host concerts here. So a warm thank you to them for offering up this space, the Malagawach Church. And what's special about the Malagawach Church is that it was actually transported across the Broad Door Lakes and up the hill to where it sits today. Helios Vocal Ensemble is going to take you on a wonderful Renaissance journey that explores both human passion and divine devotion. And it's going to move you, and it's also going to make you laugh at times. Well, it made me laugh at times, so I hope you enjoy.
We're so glad you could join us for this concert, and we're grateful to Musique Royale for making it possible. On my far right is our tenor, Michael Vandergag. Next, our soprano, Elizabeth Stones. And next to me is Simon Blake, who's been so kind as to fill in for our bass, Spencer Goff. This is a program about sacred love and erotic love, and the way the two can so often resemble one another, or even get a bit muddled up together. For example, the song we just sang you from 16th century France is about a young man who's yearning after a young lady he's just met. He's particularly interested with certain parts of her, and if you want to know which ones, you should read the translation. Just follow the link in the description. And it seems clear that she hasn't even noticed him, so he can't decide what to do with himself, whether to run away to the army or to a monastery. France in the 16th century was a very happening place for religion. They just gotten the idea that perhaps religion should start happening, in French. And they put some of the best poets and composers on the job of writing French words and music. And how did they know who were the best ones? The ones who had already proved themselves by writing love songs. And so, it was that the poet Clément Janequin found himself with the job translating the first 50 psalms into singable French so that the people could make a joyful noise unto the Lord. But he must have had a deadline, because when he needed to translate a psalm that said, "Where are you, O Lord, please come back?" he decided to recycle a love poem that said the same thing about a girl, with a few words changed around, of course. Claudin de Sermisy set it to music, and the result was something that could be either sung in church or to try to get someone to go to bed with you, depending on which text was used. We'll sing them both for you now, the love song and then the psalm. We'll sing the love song to Sermisy's music, and for the psalm, we'll use another 16th century setting by Clément Janequin.
Vient, cela, belle, vous que plus amène vous
One of the other things happening in French religion at that time was a lot of criticism of the Catholic Church. As you can imagine, the church was really big in France back then, even bigger than it is now. It was the state religion, it had a huge clergy, and not only did it not pay taxes, it actually levied its own taxes. So a lot of people had good reason to be annoyed with the church. One way they could show that annoyance was by making fun of it. For example, suggesting that holy sisters and holy brothers were not always as holy as they were supposed to be. So we're going to sing 3 quite rude songs for you now. The first is about a young priest, a young nun, inadequate supervision, and some terrible musical puns about that. The second one isn't about the church, but it's about a boy and girl on their way to market who get a little distracted en route. The problem being that they also have a pig with them. And the third is a story about a lecherous monk who is sneaking a buxom girl in through his cell window at night when she gets stuck halfway, and he makes certain observations about the parts of her that have come in and the parts of her that are still outside. We'll come back to that later. And if you want to know exactly which parts, again, you'd better visit the link in the video description. All of these poems are by the same poet, Clément Janequin, who translated those psalms. Go figure. And so we're going to sing for you Il était une religieuse by Lassus, Martin menait son pourceau au marché by Janequin. That's the same guy who wrote the pretty psalm music earlier. And Frère Thibault by Certon.
Demandez qu'il y a, la répandez, l'un et l'autre, l'un et l'autre, le c'est Frère Thibault, religieuse, qui est venu, sans chemise, par le crédit, sachant les bras, elle passe, puis la tête y a mise, et puis le sein. Car le fessier est passé ne peut pas. Parle-moi de ce passer le cul,
Now, you're not going to believe this, but Lassus, the same fellow who wrote the priest and nun song, actually took this piece, this last smutty piece, Frère Thibault, and turned it into a setting of the ordinary of the Mass. On purpose. And it got sung in church, and he published it, and he got away with it. In fact, he was knighted by the Pope the following year for his services to music. Probably not for this, though. And so we're going to sing you two excerpts from that Mass, the Kyrie and the Sanctus, from the Missa Super Frère Thibault by Lassus. You can have fun listening for what he borrowed from that last piece and how he repurposed it for this one.
Kyrie, Hosanna in excelsis, Hosanna in excelsis, Hosanna in excelsis, Hosanna in excelsis, Hosanna in excelsis.
Now, we're going to make a little side trip to Spain, an even more religious place, where a devout young man has been accused of extracurricular relations with a local girl. In between his vehement denials, he recites psalms with a clever juxtaposition of secular polyphony and sacred faux-bourdon by the composer, a daring soul who has chosen to remain anonymous. This is from the late 16th century Medinaceli songbook, Corten, espadas, afiladas.
Lenguas malas, mañana de San Francisco, lenguas malas, libérame Domine, alla lenguas malas, levantadum dicho, con la niña virgos, lenguas malas, beatus virgini Dominum, in mandatis eius voleris. Lenguas malas, lenguas malas, espadas, afiladas, lenguas malas, lenguas malas, lenguas malas, lenguas malas.
Next, we're delighted to bring you some rarely heard pieces by a remarkable young woman from Renaissance Italy, Vittoria Aleotti. She was the daughter of an architect in Ferrara. She had one book of madrigals published when she was 18, and we have no record of her after that. But there are some clues. The same year she vanishes, 1593, there suddenly appears a Raffaella Aleotti in Ferrara, a nun who wrote and published sacred music. Could it have been the same person, changing her name after taking holy orders? Aleotti's book, A Garland of Madrigals for Four Voices, shows an interesting textual journey. We're going to sing you one madrigal from the beginning, one from the middle, and one from the end. The one from the beginning, Baciai per aver vita, is on a popular text by the poet Guarini and talks about passionate kisses, just as you might expect from a teenage composer. Next, O Dolc'eterno Amore is also on a text by Guarini, but it might even have been written specifically for this book. We don't find this text anywhere else. And it's interestingly ambiguous. She calls her beloved, my sweet Lord, and eternal love, and says she is his handmaiden. So is that romance or religion? Finally, from the end of the book, we'll sing "Se del tuo corpo," which is a rare bird indeed. It's a sacred madrigal, reflecting on the death of Christ on the cross and expressing devotion to Christ instead of to love's vain flame. The text is anonymous, and it might well have been written by Vittoria herself. And so, we present this portrait of a young composer torn between erotic and religious feeling, poured out in this single book of her music.
But I beloved
Of course, the most famous example of eroticism in Western religious literature is right there in the Bible itself. The Song of Songs, the book of the Old Testament that consists entirely of love poetry, full of metaphors that 2,000 years later still don't leave much to the imagination. Judaism says it's about God's love for his chosen people. Christianity says it's about God's love for his church. You can draw your own conclusions. The great thing about this literature for composers is that no matter how passionate the music they use to set the text, they're allowed to say it's because God just loves his church so much. Heinrich Schütz studied in Venice, where he wrote some fantastic Italian madrigals before spending most of his career in Dresden. With the very sexy Ego Dormio, we like to think that this was his chance to write another erotic madrigal, but in Latin this time, and for the church. After that, we'll sing you two short settings of the Song of Songs by the Canadian composer Healy Willan. I Beheld Her Beautiful as a Dove, and the famous Rise Up My Love.
Ego
We're going to top off our program with a wonderful song by Claude Debussy. It's a 20th century piece on a 15th century text about a beautiful woman, but the first word is God. Enjoy. Now, this is the first virtual concert we've ever done, so we don't know right now how much you liked it. Maybe you grabbed your coat and snuck out in intermission, but what we hope is that you're delighted, and we hope that if you were here, you'd be clapping and maybe standing and shouting for more. So if that's true, we ought to sing you one more song. This is a Victorian part song, and you know how the Victorians were. Stiff upper lip on the outside, burning with passion on the inside. This is a secular song by Joseph Barnaby, who wrote about 600 hymns as well. So please enjoy this well-loved piece, which we think is absolutely brimming over with emotion. Cheers.
Sweet and low, sweet and low, wind of the western sea. Low, low, breathe and blow, wind of the western sea. Over the rolling waters go, come from the dying moon and blow, blow him again to me. While my little one, while my pretty one sleeps. Sleep and rest, sleep and rest. Father will come to thee soon. Rest, rest on mother's breast. Father will come to thee soon. Father will come to his bed in the nest. Silver sails on out of the west, under the silver moon. Sleep, my little one, sleep, my pretty one, sleep.
Janelle here again. Wasn't that a fantastic concert? If you've been enjoying our summer festival, please consider donating, and that will help us make more of these concerts featuring Atlantic musicians in historic venues across Nova Scotia possible. Don't think twice about it. Just scroll down the information section about the video and follow the Canada Helps link. You're gonna feel great about it, I promise.